My family forged papers. To sell my house and fund my brother's luxury trip. Dad grinned. Your house paid for his fun. I smirked back. He didn't know Grandpa left me holding the card they never saw coming. Hey Reddit. So I've been sitting on this story for a while, and let's just say my family managed to pull one of the dumbest stunts you can imagine. They thought they had me cornered, like I was the fool in the room. But the thing is, I'd been playing a different game the whole time. What followed was months of drama, legal fallout, and honestly, the most satisfying backfire I've ever witnessed. I, 31 male, grew up in a house where the scoreboard was rigged from the start. My younger brother Cameron was the golden child, and I was basically the unpaid intern of the family. Mom and Dad couldn't go 5 minutes without bragging about Cameron. Me? I could have landed a rocket on Mars, and they'd still ask if Cameron needed gas money. Cameron got his first car at 16, a brand new Jeep Wrangler with custom rims. My dad even gave a whole speech about how a young man needs to feel proud of what he drives. Meanwhile, I was still rolling in a rusty Honda I bought myself after saving 2 years of grocery store paychecks. That thing coughed every time I turned the ignition. My dad's comment? Well, you should have studied harder so you'd get a better job. Right. Because Cameron worked so hard lifting that Xbox controller. The favoritism was so loud it drowned out common sense. They paid Cameron speeding tickets like it was a monthly subscription. He wrecked his car once because he thought cruise control meant the car steered itself. My parents called it an honest mistake. Me? If I misplaced a $20 bill, my dad gave me a 30-minute lecture about financial responsibility. The only one who ever treated me like more than background furniture was my grandpa. Old school guy. Worked with his hands, paid cash for everything, hated excuses. He didn't hand out hugs or compliments, but when he spoke, you listened. More than once, he told me flat out, your father can't handle money. He thinks family property is his personal piggy bank. Don't ever trust him with what's yours. At the time, I shrugged it off. Later, those words would echo in my head like a warning alarm. When Grandpa passed, the will and trust came out. My parents were all smiles until the lawyer explained the split. The Scarlet house, an older colonial with good bones, wasn't going to them. It was locked into a trust with me as the trustee and sole beneficiary. My parents were stuck waiting on probate for whatever cash, stocks, and heirlooms were left. Cameron looked like someone had told him Santa retired. The house wasn't some flashy mansion, but to me, it was perfect. My dad sneered, called it a money pit. Cameron laughed at the kitchen cabinets, said they looked like something out of a grandma's Pinterest board. My mom sniffed and asked if I could even afford to keep the place up. I didn't argue. I just moved in and got to work renovating it. Of course, my parents never gave credit. My dad would walk in, look at the new paint job and say, you should have hired a professional. Looks cheap. Cameron would smirk and say, why are you wasting money on that dump? You should just flip it and get a condo. This from the guy who didn't even pay rent, living off mom and dad while figuring out his future. I didn't bother defending myself. You don't argue with people who are allergic to reality. I just kept working. Cameron, though, was getting cockier. He'd brag about how, once probate finished, he'd be living large. He talked about the cash and stocks like they were already in his pocket. My parents encouraged it, telling him he deserved a fresh start after all his stress. What stress? The biggest crisis in his life was losing his WIFI password. I'd listen, nod, and bite back a laugh. Let them think whatever they wanted. I had my house, my career was on the rise, and every time they looked down on me, it was just fuel. Grandpa hadn't just left me a house. He'd handed me the stage where everything would play out. They just didn't know it yet. At work, things were heating up in the best way. My boss called me into his office one Monday morning with that serious face managers love to use when they're about to dump a mountain of responsibility on you. He said the firm was picking one project manager to fly out to Tokyo for 3 weeks to oversee negotiations with Japanese investors. The guy they picked would be on track for a senior position if he nailed it. Then he paused, leaned back in his chair and said, "You're my pick." That was the moment I realized I'd been playing checkers while the universe handed me a chessboard. The Tokyo trip was huge. I knew if I pulled this off, I wouldn't just be the guy renovating his grandpa's old place. I'd be the guy pulling 6 figures, building skyscrapers, making deals across continents. But of course, nothing good ever happens in my family without my parents trying to stick their fingers in it. The second I mentioned the trip at Sunday dinner, my mom pounced like she'd been waiting all week for the setup. "Oh, sweetheart, you'll be gone so long. Why don't you leave us a key to your house, just in case something happens? What if the pipes burst? Or the power goes out?" I just stared at her. The same woman who told me my floors looked cheap suddenly cared about protecting my house? My dad didn't even look up from his plate when he chimed in, "Yeah, give us a key. You don't want the place sitting there unguarded." Right, because the people who'd mocked it nonstop were definitely losing sleep over my plumbing. Now, this is where most people would say no, trust their gut, and call it a day. But me? I saw an opportunity. Their greed was practically leaking out of their pores. I could see it in the way my dad glanced at Cameron when he said it, like they already had a plan in motion. So I smiled, nodded, and said, "Sure, I'll drop off a spare before I leave." And they thought they won. I thought, perfect. See, I'd been preparing for this kind of move. Before packing my bags, I installed a set of cameras around the house. Nothing crazy, just small, discreet, video-only devices tucked into corners of the office, living room, and near the front door. Pictures say more than enough when you've got family members shuffling papers that aren't theirs. They even walked past the little CCTV in use sticker by the door. Cameron, meanwhile, was on his own planet. He'd just been dumped by some girl he'd dated for maybe 2 months. He sulked around like he'd survived a war. One night, he cornered me and started rambling about needing to heal with a luxury vacation. I asked him what his plan was, since last I checked, luxury vacations require money. He sighed like I was too dumb to understand and said, "Mom and Dad said they can't help right now. Something about retirement funds or whatever. It's so unfair. I need this." Unfair. The guy hadn't worked more than 6 months at any job in his life, and he thought it was unfair the world didn't hand him a trip to the Bahamas on a silver platter. I didn't argue. I just watched him complain, already connecting dots in my head. Cameron wanted a vacation. Mom and Dad wanted a house key. And I? I wanted to see how far they'd go when temptation sat right in front of them. The day before my flight, I drove over to my parents' place, handed my mom the key. She smiled like she'd just won the lottery, all fake sweetness. "Don't worry, honey. We'll keep everything safe." Dad grunted in approval. Cameron was on the couch, scrolling his phone, grinning like a guy who already had his toes in the sand. I should have felt nervous, but honestly, I was calm. I'd built this house myself. Every corner of it was mine. If they touched it, it wasn't me who'd lose. It was them. I'd set the board, and all I had to do was leave the pieces where they could reach them. The next morning, I boarded my flight to Tokyo. 14 hours in a cramped seat, no legroom, surrounded by crying babies. It was brutal, but my head wasn't on the flight. It was on what might happen back home. By the time we touched down in Japan, I'd already pictured my dad digging through my desk, Cameron bragging about how family property belongs to family. But I didn't panic. I buried myself in the job. Meetings, presentations, late nights staring at spreadsheets while Tokyo's skyline glowed outside the window. Every handshake, every deal, I thought, this is the future they'll never touch. 3 weeks later, I stepped off the plane back in Charlotte, exhausted but wired. The trip had been a success. Partnerships locked down, my boss's email practically dripping with praise. All I wanted was to go home, throw my suitcase on the floor, and collapse on my couch. The taxi pulled up to my house. The porch light was off. That was weird. I'd set it on a timer. I hauled my suitcase up the steps, stuck my key in the lock, and it didn't turn. Tried the backup. Nothing. The lock had been changed. Dad must have handed things off to the buyers, who'd already swapped it out. I stood there in the rain, staring at the door of my own house, and I couldn't even get inside. Game on. I didn't stand on the porch like some lost puppy banging on the door. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to Dad, and hit call. He picked up after 2 rings, voice way too cheerful for a guy who normally answers with a grunt. "Oh, you're back. How was Japan?" I cut him off. "My key doesn't work. Locks are changed." "What the hell happened?" There was a pause, just long enough to be suspicious. Then he cleared his throat. "Yeah, why don't you swing by the house? We'll talk in person." The cab driver was still idling, so I slid back in, gave him the new address, and sat there in silence. My gut told me exactly what I was walking into, but part of me wanted to hear them say it out loud. 20 minutes later, I was standing in their living room. Cameron was on the couch, scrolling his phone with that smug, self-satisfied look I'd seen since childhood. He looked up just long enough to grin. Mom was in the kitchen, moving things around for no reason, avoiding eye contact. Dad sat in his recliner, remote in hand, like he hadn't just upended my life. "What's going on?" I asked, dragging my suitcase inside. Cameron was the first to pipe up, holding out his phone like a prize. "Check this out, bro." He swiped through photos. Him on a white sand beach, him by an infinity pool, him holding some neon-colored drink with a paper umbrella in it. Bahamas, baby. 5-star all the way. Private butler, spa treatments, the works. I stared at the screen, then back at him. How the hell did you pay for this? That's when Dad muted the TV and leaned forward. His face carried that smug, I know better than you look he'd perfected over the years. We found a solution, he said casually. We sold your house. I blinked once, twice. You, what? Mom finally turned from the kitchen, wringing her hands. It was a good offer. All cash, closed in 8 days. Cameron really needed this trip, sweetheart. He was devastated after that breakup. Devastated, Cameron repeated, nodding like he'd just buried a spouse instead of losing a girlfriend of 2 months. I looked at them, one by one, waiting for someone to laugh and admit it was a joke. But no, they were dead serious. Dad leaned back in his recliner, looking proud of himself. Family resources belong to family. That house was just sitting there, soaking up money. Cameron needed healing. You'll bounce back. You've always been lucky with jobs. I raised an eyebrow. So let me get this straight. While I was 7,000 miles away working 14-hour days, you went into my house, forged my signature, and sold my property to fund a vacation? Dad waved a hand, dismissive. Don't be dramatic. We had access to your papers. It was just paperwork. You're too attached to that house anyway. It's just bricks and wood. Bricks and wood that weren't yours, I shot back. Cameron scrolled to another photo and smirked. We ate at the aquarium restaurant at Atlantis. Insane. Sharks and stingrays swimming right past the glass while we had steak. You would have loved it. Mom nodded like he'd accomplished something noble. He needed this, honey. You have to understand. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not a full belly laugh, just a sharp exhale through my nose and a smirk spreading across my face. That was enough to knock the confidence out of Dad's tone. He frowned. What's so funny? I looked at him, still smirking, and shook my head. Nothing. I grabbed my suitcase and started toward the door. Where are you going? Mom called after me, her voice tinged with panic. To make some calls, I said flatly. Enjoy your evening. As I stepped out, I heard Cameron whisper to Dad, confused. What's his problem? He can just buy another house, right? The door clicked shut behind me. They thought they'd beaten me. They thought they'd pulled the ultimate family resource redistribution. What they didn't know was that their little stunt wasn't just illegal, it was fatal to their future. Game on indeed. I didn't go back to some hotel or wander around like a lost tourist in my own city. I knew exactly where I was headed. My best friend Nate lived 10 minutes away. We'd been tight since high school. He knew the full story about my family, the favoritism, the freeloading, all of it. When he opened the door and saw me standing there with a drenched suitcase, he didn't even ask. Just stepped aside and said, All right, what did they do this time? I dumped the suitcase by his couch, sat down, and gave him the short version. They actually sold it? Dude, they can't do that. That's when I let the smirk return. That's the thing. They thought they could. They thought they were smart. But you remember my grandpa, right? Old guy with the cigars? Never smiled? Yeah, him. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling for a second, remembering the conversation like it happened yesterday. A few months before he passed, Grandpa had pulled me into his office. The man didn't mince words. Your father's greedy. He sees money, he takes it. Doesn't matter if it's his, mine, or yours. So I'm leaving the house to you, but not just that. I'm putting a clause in the trust. If he or anyone else tampers with it, they're out. No inheritance, no cash, no stocks, nothing. The law will treat them like they died before me. At the time, I thought he was being overly dramatic. But Grandpa wasn't the type to waste words. He knew exactly who he raised and what Cameron would grow into. I sat up, looked at Nate, and said, They just triggered it. Every penny they thought they had coming from probate, gone. Grandpa cut them off from the grave. Nate blinked. Wait, you mean, if they tried to mess with the house? Not if. They did. And yeah, they're done. I pulled out my phone, opened an app, and handed it to him. He leaned in, eyes widening as the footage played. The living room of my house. My dad rifling through my desk drawers, pulling out papers. My mom hunched over the kitchen table, pen in hand, copying my signature onto a deed. The realtor sat there sweating, and beside him was a mobile notary who barely glanced at the ID they handed over. Dad must have slipped them my old passport he'd found, because the notary stamped it without a question. Everyone in that room knew it was shady, but the realtor smelled his commission, and the notary wanted a quick payday. Holy, Nate whispered, pausing the video. You set this up, didn't you? I shrugged. Installed cameras before I left. Figured temptation might get the best of them. Guess I was right. It was more than a guess, though. When Mom had pushed so hard for the key, I knew it was bait. I didn't fight it. I wanted to see if Grandpa's warning would play out. And it did. Perfectly. The next morning, I marched into my lawyer's office. Mr. Carver had handled Grandpa's estate since forever. Silver hair, no nonsense. The kind of guy who could scare you with a raised eyebrow. I laid out the story, the forged deed, and the video evidence. He watched silently, then leaned back in his chair. "This is textbook fraud," he said finally. "The sale is voidable. You're the trustee. Only you can sign off, and your signature was forged. A court will rescind the deed, and the buyers will be made whole through title insurance. The DA will be interested too." "And the clause?" I asked. He slid his glasses down his nose. "The clause is ironclad, and your grandfather was smart. He mirrored it in both the trust and his will, estate-wide. That means by tampering with the house, your parents and brother are legally deemed predeceased in all matters of inheritance. Not just the house. Every dime they were supposed to get from probate skips them entirely." I felt that calm again. Not anger, not relief, just clarity. They'd sold themselves out. But Carver wasn't finished. He tapped his pen against his desk. "There's something else you should know. That money from the fake sale didn't just go to a vacation. Your brother had outstanding debts, significant ones. Credit cards, private loans, even some shady crypto deals. A good portion of those funds went to paying off collectors before they came after him publicly." I tilted my head. "So the Bahamas trip was just the Instagram version?" "Exactly. A cover. If those debts had gone public, your parents would have been humiliated. So they used your house to plug the hole." I couldn't help it. I laughed. Nate glanced at me like I'd lost it, but I shook my head. "They committed felonies to save a loser from his own gambling problem. You can't make this up." Carver raised a hand. "Don't laugh too much yet. The DA may offer plea deals, but there will be consequences. Restitution, probation, possibly community service. And your brother? He'll be liable for every dime of that vacation money. Civil judgment, most likely." I stood, shaking Carver's hand. "That's fine. I'm not worried about punishment. I just wanted confirmation that I'm not crazy, and that Grandpa's clause will hold." He gave me a rare smile. "It will. Your grandfather was many things, but careless wasn't one of them." Walking out of that office, I felt like I'd finally pulled the curtain back. My family always acted like they were smarter than me, like I was just the workhorse who'd get by. Now, they'd fallen into a trap an old man had set years ago, and I just watched them walk straight into it. That night, Nate and I sat on his porch with a couple of takeout boxes. He asked, "So what's the next move?" I smirked. "Let them enjoy their little victory lap. They think they scored big. That Cameron's healed or whatever nonsense. In a few weeks, the hammer drops. Sale voided. Criminal charges filed, inheritance gone. And me? I'll still be sitting pretty in my house." Nate whistled low. "Dude, that's cold." "Not cold," I corrected. "Calculated. They've spent their whole lives calling me lucky. They're about to find out I was just smarter. While they thought they'd locked me out, I wasn't stranded. What my parents never knew was that I'd kept a small apartment near my job site. Nothing fancy. One bedroom, cheap furniture, but close enough to the office that I used it during crunch weeks. I never told them about it on purpose. I'd learned a long time ago that the less ammo I gave my family, the better. So while they bragged about leaving me homeless, I was stretched out on a decent mattress, eating takeout, watching Netflix, and laughing at the thought of them thinking they'd scored some big win. The real fun started when my lawyer, Mr. Carver, got involved. We walked into the title company with the forged documents and my hidden camera footage queued up on a flash drive. The rep's face went pale halfway through watching my dad rooting around in my office and my mom copying my signature on a deed. By the time the realtor popped up in the footage, nervously sweating while nodding along, the rep looked like he was about to faint. "This sale," Carver said, calm as a surgeon, "this sale is null, fraudulent. A court will rescind the deed, and the buyers will be reimbursed through title insurance." The rep nodded like a bobblehead. "Yes, of course, Mr. Carver. We'll coordinate with the DA's office while the title insurer covers the buyers." And just like that, their big score was already unraveling. The best part came by the end of the month in a courtroom. The DA had filed charges: conspiracy, forgery, theft by deception. It wasn't a full trial, more like a preliminary hearing. My parents sat stiff at the defendant's table, Cameron beside them looking like a kid waiting for his report card. Mom kept smoothing her skirt. Dad stared straight ahead with his jaw tight, and Cameron scrolled his phone until the bailiff barked at him. Carver stood and explained the situation to the judge. He laid out the trust, the forged signatures, the video proof. My parents looked smaller with each sentence. Then came the part I'd been waiting for. "Additionally," Carver said, adjusting his glasses. Your grandfather mirrored the interference clause in both the trust and his will. Anyone who tampers with trust property is treated as predeceased estate-wide. The judge raised his brows. So by selling the house, they effectively disinherited themselves. Carver finished. You could have heard a pin drop. My dad's face went red, like someone had pulled a plug on him. That's ridiculous, he barked. We're his parents. We're entitled. No, Carver interrupted, voice like steel. You were entitled until you interfered. Legally, you no longer exist in the line of succession. All assets from probate bypass you entirely. Mom's eyes filled with tears instantly. But we're family. This isn't right. We were just trying to help Cameron. He's fragile. The judge didn't flinch. The law doesn't make exceptions for favoritism. The trust language is clear. Cameron looked back and forth between them, lost. Wait, so, no money? At all? I leaned forward in my chair, smirking just enough for him to see. Congrats, bro. That vacation wasn't just a trip. It was your inheritance. Hope the Shark Tank dinner was worth it. The look on his face was priceless. Like someone had just told him Santa got evicted. The judge ordered them to return for sentencing after plea negotiations. Carver patted my shoulder on the way out. You played this perfectly, he muttered. Over the next month, everything collapsed. My dad and mom both took plea deals. 2 years probation, restitution, and 600 hours of community service each. Not the cushy kind either. Roadside trash pickup, community center maintenance, food pantry shifts. Dad, the man who thought manual labor was beneath him, now wore a neon vest twice a week picking up soda cans by the highway. Mom didn't fare better. She ended up scrubbing graffiti off walls as part of her community service. She tried to spin it as giving back to the community, but when neighbors spotted her in the vest, the whispers spread fast. Cameron got slapped too. 18 months probation and a civil judgment ordering him to repay the $45,000 he spent on his healing vacation. The court didn't care that he'd blown it on butlers and cocktails. The debt collector circling him for his crypto losses and unpaid credit cards didn't care either. They piled on lawsuits until his paycheck from a part-time retail job was getting garnished before he even saw it. Meanwhile, legal fees and restitution gutted my parents' savings. The smug people who once bragged about being comfortable suddenly had nothing. They put their house up for sale within 2 months. By the time the dust settled, they'd moved into a cramped apartment on the wrong side of town. Gone were the leather recliners, the shiny SUV, the smug backyard pool parties. They were just another couple of bitter, middle-aged people living above a laundromat. And the best part? Neighbors talked. Extended family who once praised Cameron stopped inviting them to gatherings. People whispered about the fraud and the court case. My parents, who cared more about appearances than anything, couldn't step outside without feeling the weight of judgmental stares. I didn't celebrate loudly. I didn't need to. I just kept going to work, driving to my backup apartment, and waiting for the paperwork that would officially restore my house to me. The funny part was, I was never actually without a roof. They thought they'd left me ruined. In reality, I still had my little crash pad near the site. Never told my parents it existed. I was showering in my own bathroom, cooking in my own kitchen, while they panicked about rent and legal bills. That night, sitting in my apartment, I poured a glass of water, leaned back, and thought about Grandpa. The old man had been right about everything. He'd called it years ago. Dad would try to grab what wasn't his, Mom would back him up, and Cameron would treat life like a never-ending handout. Grandpa didn't just leave me a house. He left me the fuse to their self-destruction, and they lit it themselves. The cracks showed faster than even I expected. Within weeks of the sentencing, Cameron's landed a job at a car wash. Minimum wage, tips if he was lucky. The same guy who once bragged that hard work isn't my vibe was now scrubbing mud off tires while debt collectors called him on his brakes. I didn't hear it from him, of course. He avoided me like the plague. I heard it from mutual acquaintances who couldn't resist laughing. My parents weren't holding up either. Dad came home furious after community service, complaining that the city workers were incompetent and that he shouldn't have to pick up trash alongside real criminals. Mom tried spinning her graffiti scrubbing duties as volunteer work, but neighbors saw through it. The humiliation burned them more than the actual punishment. And then came the money fights. Without their savings, everything was tight. Rent on their shabby apartment, restitution payments, groceries, all suddenly unfair burdens. I knew because I started getting the texts. Mom, honey, maybe you could loan us a little just to cover rent this month. We'll pay you back, promise. Dad, as your father, I'm asking you to step up for the family. Don't forget who raised you. A Cameron. Bro, if you help me pay off this one collector, I can flip it into something bigger and pay you back double. You trust me, right? I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Watching them spiral was enough. The implosion came to a head one night, about 2 months in. A cousin of mine spilled the story after attending a family dinner. Apparently, Dad snapped first. He yelled at Cameron across the table, calling him an ungrateful brat who dragged them all down with his selfishness. Cameron fired back that it wasn't his fault. They were the ones who signed the papers and forged my name. Mom tried to play peacemaker, but Dad turned on her too, accusing her of babying Cameron into a man-child. It got so heated the cousin said the neighbors called the cops over the noise. No arrests, just warnings. But the embarrassment was enough to turn their arguments into daily routine. Soon after, Cameron tried a new strategy, flipping on his own parents. Word got around that he'd met with a debt counselor and told them the whole fraud had been his mom and dad's idea, not his. He played the victim card, saying he just went along because they pressured him. Of course, Mom and Dad didn't take that quietly. Dad stormed into the counselor's office the next week, demanding they correct the record. Mom sobbed to anyone who'd listen, insisting Cameron had betrayed them. The golden child had officially become the scapegoat. I didn't have to lift a finger. They were eating each other alive. Meanwhile, I kept living my life. Work was going better than ever. Tokyo had put me on the radar, and I was tapped to manage a new multi-million-dollar build downtown. Long hours, sure, but every late-night drive back to my apartment reminded me why I kept my distance. My career was climbing while theirs was buried under debt and probation reports. The funniest part? Extended family stopped talking to them altogether. At one birthday party, I overheard an uncle mutter, "They thought they were clever, and look where it got them." Not one person defended them anymore. Even relatives who used to side with Cameron started keeping their distance. My parents hated it. They'd built their whole identity on appearances, and now they were invisible. One night, Nate and I were having beers on his porch when my phone buzzed. Another text from Dad. This one was angrier than usual. "You're smug now, but don't forget we're still your family. One day, you'll need us." I showed it to Nate, who nearly spit his drink. Need them? For what? Lessons in fraud? I shrugged. Exactly. They think blood entitles them to loyalty. But Grandpa saw through it, and so do I. The truth was, I didn't need revenge anymore. The claws, the court, the debt collectors. They'd done the heavy lifting. My family had turned on me for years, and now they were turning on each other. My job was just to watch. By the third month, Cameron had stopped speaking to my parents completely. He blamed them for ruining his future. My parents, in turn, started telling people Cameron was mentally unstable and a disappointment. The golden child crown had finally slipped, and they didn't know what to do without their favorite to prop up. And me? I stayed quiet, patient, steady. Every time I pulled the county record and saw deed rescission stamped across the top, I felt that same calm smirk tug at my lips. The house would be mine again soon, officially. My family had set the fire, and all I had to do was sit back and enjoy the warmth. Months later, the legal machinery finally finished grinding. The forged deed was rescinded by court order, and the buyers were reimbursed through title insurance, and the Charlotte house officially landed back where it always belonged, in my hands, as trustee and sole beneficiary. The title paperwork came through one gray morning in the mail. I remember opening the envelope, reading my name on the deed, and feeling a surge of quiet satisfaction. Not excitement, not relief, just confirmation. It was mine again, the way Grandpa intended. Walking through the front door was surreal. The house looked exactly as I'd left it. The same paint on the walls, the same workshop smell in the garage, but it didn't feel the same. Before, it had been my project. Now it was proof. Proof that I wasn't the lucky one my dad always dismissed me as. Proof that I'd been right to trust my instincts and not them. Proof that Grandpa's warning was the most valuable inheritance of all. Meanwhile, the fallout from the clause hit them like a second hammer. Probate finally closed, and the judge announced the official distribution of Grandpa's other assets: cash, stocks, heirlooms. Normally, that would have been split between my parents, Cameron, and me, but thanks to the interference clause, they were legally treated as if they had died before Grandpa. Their shares skipped them entirely. Some flowed to me directly, some to extended family, and some to a small charity Grandpa had written in. My parents sat there stunned, Cameron looking like he'd just been told the Wi-Fi was down permanently. I didn't need to say anything, but I did anyway. "Congrats," I told them in the hallway outside the courtroom. "You didn't just sell my house. You sold your way out of Grandpa's will." Efficient, really. Dad glared at me like he wanted to lunge, but probation had taken the fight out of him. Mom started crying, clutching her purse like it was her lifeline. Cameron just shook his head, muttering, "That's not fair," over and over. Fair. From the guy who thought a luxury vacation was medical treatment. After that, things spiraled further. The restitution payments, community service hours, and legal bills drained everything they had left. They sold their house, traded their SUV for a used sedan with peeling paint, and crammed into a one-bedroom apartment over a laundromat. Mom hated the smell of detergent. Dad hated the neighbors blasting music, but they couldn't afford better. Cameron? He moved into the apartment for a while but bailed after a screaming match with Dad. He'd taken a delivery job to scrape together payments, but between garnishments and his own stupidity, he never caught up. Word was he owed more money than he made. Every time he posted a photo of a greasy fast food meal on social media, people in the comments reminded him of his Bahamas trip. His healing vacation turned into a running joke. They tried reaching out, of course. Letters, texts, voicemails. The tone shifted over time. First came the fake apologies. "We realize we hurt you. We want to talk about making things right." Then came the guilt trips. "Family is all you have. Don't abandon us like this." Finally, the begging. "If you could just spare a little, we could get back on our feet." I never responded. Why would I? They didn't want forgiveness. They wanted money. And Grandpa's claws had already answered them better than I ever could. Life without them was peaceful. My career kept climbing. The Tokyo project opened doors, and soon I was managing bigger jobs, shaking hands with city officials, making real moves. On weekends, I split my time between my quiet apartment and the Charlotte house. Sometimes I'd sit in the backyard, grilling steaks, looking at the garden I'd planted, and thinking about how different things looked without the constant weight of family drama. The best part? Extended family started coming around again, not to side with my parents, but to congratulate me. Aunts and uncles who used to gush about Cameron now pulled me aside, saying things like, "Your grandpa would be proud. You handled it the right way." Maybe they were late to the party, but I didn't care. Recognition wasn't the point. The point was, I'd done it on my terms. One evening, I pulled Grandpa's old pocket knife from a drawer. He used to carry it everywhere, a small reminder that you should always be prepared. I set it on the workbench in my garage, next to a project I was finishing. I thought about his last warning. Your father will try to take what isn't his. Don't let him. He'd been right. They'd tried, and instead of taking from me, they'd cut themselves out of everything. The irony was perfect. They wanted the house, the money, the recognition. They ended up with none of it. I wanted independence, peace, and something to build for myself. I had all of it. That's when it hit me. Revenge hadn't been about screaming at them or throwing them out of my life in some dramatic showdown. Revenge was watching them sink under the weight of their own choices while I rose. So I leaned back in my chair, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood, the hum of cicadas, kids playing down the block, the clink of tools on my bench, and I smiled. They thought they locked me out of my own house. Turns out, they just locked themselves out of the family.